Hey there, folks. This is Lori Shaw, Chief Experience Officer with Professional Pet Sitting, and I'm hanging out with my buddy George here, who is a gorgeous senior golden retriever. And though it may be difficult to tell from this video that you'll see, that George lives with two very serious and chronic disorders on a daily basis, and they can greatly impact his quality of life. They don't so much because his family has been so engaged and diligent about carrying out the treatment plan that his veterinarian has put in place for him to live his very best. So with their blessing, I'm going to talk a little bit about both of these disorders. I'm going to preface this by saying I'm not going to go into a ton of detail about both. I'm going to give you the highlights, and then you'll have resources at the end that you can look at in your own at your own will. So the first disorder I want to talk about is thankfully something that we don't see very often, and it is a disorder called megaesophagus, or mega-E. And essentially what happens in this disorder is that the esophagus, first of all, is enlarged, and it also lacks motility, meaning that it can't move the food and the fluid that comes in down in an efficient manner. So what happens sometimes is that food and water, the liquid, will get into the airway, which, as you can imagine, is quite harrowing for the pet. And it's also very dangerous because it can lead to aspiration pneumonia. It also is accompanied by some acid reflux, which, is, you're probably well aware, can be, especially in the long term, very challenging and impactful. So thankfully, researchers and vets have come up with treatment plans that can really help dogs live great into the long term. And the first of which is adhering to a proper feeding regimen, feeding the dog correctly, which is something that you'll find in the resources. The right medication, which includes a motility drug to enhance that process, and a drug to help mitigate the stomach acid that occurs. So with those things, it's a real win-win. But one thing I want to point out is something that George's family discovered in their research after he was diagnosed, is that the use of an inflatable e-collar can be a huge benefit to these dogs because it helps keep the head in a position where the esophagus is more able to function normally, and it also has the secondary benefit of helping to keep that stomach acid from coming up and causing problems. So it's a win-win that way. So moving on to the second disorder that this little guy deals with. It's one that I say pretty frequently in my work as somebody who cares for pets who are in either their end of life or in hospice or are geriatric or seniors. So we do see this a lot in large breed dogs, just as we do with mega-E. That is something that these two disorders share. But with laryngeal paralysis, or LARPAR as they call it, what essentially happens is that the nerve function around the larynx can be inefficient, so that can't operate quite as normally. So anecdotally, I'll tell you something that families will say to me when they meet me, when I meet their dogs and I hear them breathing funny and barking, this very hoarse bark that is very characteristic of the disease. They'll say, "How did you know that they have laryngeal paralysis?" And I'll tell them I can hear their very hoarse bark, "Hoo, hoo, hoo." Or when they're trying to breathe, especially when they're very excited or overheated, they'll have that characteristic it's because the larynx can't support that airflow coming in and out. So as you can imagine, it's very distressing to the pet, and it can also exacerbate any anxiety that they might have. This is also a real problem when they're really warm, so they overheat quite easily too. So that's something that we need to be watchful of as caregivers. So thankfully, there are treatments available for this too, and in both cases, I highly recommend that families get to the vet right away so that these can be managed. And as you can see, George is living proof that both of these disorders, even in tandem, can be treated quite successfully.